Hey, Clemson family. Was there a lull in Clemson recruiting? I think there was a lot going on under the hood, but there is a major recruit who committed this weekend, and we will get into the details of Bryce Davis.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll also get you ready for ACC Media Days, which are coming up. We had Dabo Swinney and Clemson's assistant coaches talking last week. This week we get Dabo Swinney and four of Clemson's best players speaking. So it should be a fun week to keep up with the Tigers.
Absolutely. Team leadership, I think, is going to be clearly strong at this event. Welcome to the Reign Supreme All Week podcast. We are glad you found us. We hope you will comment on this episode, youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Join our community, make your feelings heard about what's going on with recruiting, what we can expect to see from the team, and we will get into some of the highlights that we heard from those coaches. But first, let's talk about a big bright spot coming for 2025, and that is defensive end Bryce Davis out of Greensboro, North Carolina. A guy whose reputation precedes him so well that even DJ Reader, former defensive tackle and first baseman for two Clemson Tigers teams, was excited about it on social media.
He was, and I think there's a good reason for Clemson fans to be excited about this. He's a really good player, right? You can never have enough guys in the trenches. We talk about that all the time. Offensive and defensive lines should be the focus of every recruiting class. But also, Bill, this didn't feel like he was going to be a Clemson guy maybe 3 months ago, right? I mean, there was a lot of talk of that this was trending toward Georgia. And then maybe last month there was a lot of talk about Duke, and it just felt like Clemson did its work and did its work and did its work. Got him on campus a couple of times. His dad talked about the difference in seeing what the Clemson culture and atmosphere were in person, and that certainly helped Clemson land this guy Bryce Davis in recruiting. So I love what you see from him. I love the size, and he's only going to get bigger when he gets on campus. We see that with college or high school recruiting, how much bigger these guys get when they get on campus. But just the speed, the athleticism, the attack from him up front will be a really welcome piece to this class for Clemson. And, look, he's a top 100 player commit consensus across the board on all the recruiting sites. Georgia wanted him. And right now, if Georgia wants you, you're a big-time recruit. So I don't care about stars or any of that stuff. To me, I look at who offered and who wanted. And he was offered by all the big-time programs. And that says a lot about him as a player and what he can bring to this program.
Yep, it's encouraging to me, basically, that Nick Eason and Chris Rumpf and Wes Goodwin and Dabo Swinney wanted him. That matters more to me than any of the recruiting grades out there. But I love that you bring up those comparable offers, right? Like, who else was chasing a particular player, and maybe some shades of Sammy Brown there, right? Where the Bulldogs definitely wanted him. There were the Bulldogs already had a couple of takes at defensive end, if I'm not mistaken, and Bryce Davis joins now Ari Watford as the other defensive end take. So two guys on the ends, two guys in the middle for the class of 2025, 14 commits overall. Tigers vault up the rankings a little bit, and it gives the Tigers, you can see, by the way, 6'3", 250 is what he averages across the four recruiting sites, the major recruiting sites, and the evaluations that they get. I hate to just latch on to one number because one might be a little taller, a little short, a little heavier, a little slight. So I try to put all those together. I know that at least ESPN likes to get them verified from independent camps. I'm sure other sites have things that work better for them. So nice to see at least a 6'3", 250 frame, judging by the experts and how they see his size. You could see on those clips before, he's got nice speed at that size. And like you said, managing the weight gain and doing it the right way, he's going to have a chance to make, I think, a quick impact. And by the time he and Ari Watford get there, a chance to pair up with current freshman Darian Mayo, and maybe by the time they're all three really coached up and ready to go and physically developed, you're going to see them be a nice three-man rotation at defensive end, setting the edge and getting after passers. I really liked Davis's highlight clips. Of course, they are just the highlights. It's a best of. So you trust a coach like Chris Rumph, the new defensive end coach at Clemson, to be addressing the weaknesses as well, and to see that, hey, this is a guy who we can come to count on in the years ahead.
Well, and you feel like between Nick Eason and Chris Rumph, you've got as good of a defensive line coaching combination probably as there is in the country, right? If it's not the best, it's in the conversation. And if they want this guy and they want Amari Adams and they want Isaiah Campbell and they want Ari Watford, that's good enough. That should be good enough for us. And both coaches, Eason and Rumph, have coached in the NFL. So that's got to help, Bill. That has got to be a selling point in recruiting. And we're seeing them do really well in recruiting. And now I just want to see them get their hands on these guys, right? and we talk about the clay all the time. Mold that clay into something that's going to be a really outstanding player for Clemson. Bryce Davis has the clay. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But now these guys will get him on campus and start to work with him. That's an exciting thing for Clemson fans, or it should be.
Couple other things that are exciting to me. This is a guy who is very interested in his academics. So it was basically, according to a lot of reports, down to Clemson, Georgia, and Duke. Anyone who's going to take Duke seriously this late in the process, I think that says a lot about his priorities in life, and that he's not just going to be all out football, all his eggs in one basket. And we know that that's something that Dabo Swinney likes to shape this program around. The other exciting thing is that All-In Cookout is coming up soon on the calendar. This gives the Tigers a little bit of momentum going into that with 14 commits now, as you can see on the screen. And I think probably 4, maybe 5, maybe 3 really key prospects coming to campus very soon. So you like to see this commitment maybe start to ignite a little more momentum again for the Tigers and get things going on the player acquisition front, the talent acquisition front, right? So
yes,
and then that'll of course segue into all right, now it's time to start focusing on fall camp being around the corner. Once you get a lot of these 2025 guys committed, and of course they're not signed, but there's a pretty good track record at Clemson. Once you have the commits, they are for all intents and purposes locked down, and the coaches can go and focus on the clay that's already in the room and getting those guys up and ready for the season. YouTube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Let us know what you're thinking about the program and where things are going on the recruiting front. There's been a lot of message board talk out there about Clemson's recruiting being so disappointing, but I'll tell you what, I look at that list of names that I just had up there. There is a ton of talent. There's a very high average star ranking, and don't worry about where this team fits into the final national recruiting class rankings by the 4 major services. These coaches know what they want. These players are all very talented. And like you said, I'll be more eager to see what they're like when they get onto campus, much more so than where exactly they place in a hierarchy. Stars do matter. You and I disagree on that. Stars do matter, but the exact number down to 2 decimal points, that's not what matters. That's not going to be the takeaway for how well this class will perform. So let's also go right into, speaking of fall camp being right around the corner and the clay that's going to be molded to make the 2024 Tigers on the field hopefully a success, and they are going to be chasing a return to the playoff. We're going to start to hear from the players up in Charlotte during the media days.
Yeah, I love it. I love media days, right? I mean, we've had conferences, media days. SEC was last week. Big 12 was last week. Big 10 and ACC are this week, and we get to start to hear from the players. And I love that. I don't particularly like attending them, but I like watching them.
I wish I was going
on TV. I've never, the couple I've been to, I've never really gotten a whole lot of it out of it, but that's too deep into baseball for us to kind of get into that. But I do want to hear from Cade Klubnik and Phil Maffa and Barrett Carter and RJ Mickens. The leadership group, you're starting to see that take hold. And typically that's who Dabo Swinney is going to take to these events. Barrett Carter, I wouldn't say he had a disappointing year, but I would say this time last year, we probably thought he was going to be in the NFL. And the year he had last year probably didn't live up to his standard. Phil Maffa broke out in the second half of the season. Cade Klubnik is the quarterback. That makes sense. He's got to be better this year. And then RJ Mickens is a guy who you feel like just is that guy that we kind of see from Clemson every year. He's been in the system. He's a good player. Doesn't get a lot of the attention, and then boom, he's going to break out in that third or fourth year in the system. So, he probably is a little bit under the radar because people look at Khalil Barnes, and maybe in the past they looked at Makuba, but maybe overlooked Mickens a little bit. So those are the guys who we can see are probably going to be leaders on this year's team.
Yeah, one of the things from last week's interviews with the coaches that intrigued me a lot, and we may have mentioned this in the running backs episode, is that Maffa's really finding his voice. Well, now we're going to get to see that for ourselves. Like that's already been foreshadowed a little bit by Coach Sweeney. Now we're going to get to hear more from Maffa in his own right. I'm also very interested to see what Klubnik's kind of mindset is in handling what I think will be some tough questions about his play last year, particularly in the first half of last season and the emphasis on protecting the football. You're going to hear the fumble word a lot. You may hear the interception word a lot, although I don't mind some of those deep interceptions. Like I was watching a replay of the Clemson, North Carolina game last year, and there was that pick at the end of the first half that was in the end zone, but that was kind of a mid-range to maybe a little bit of a deep ball. I think he was probably trying to throw that one away and chucked it deep. It got picked. That's not the kind of interception I mind. What I really mind is the ones that are close to the line of scrimmage, maybe even in the backfield on a screen that are very, very pivotal for field position. The deeper balls, that's a little more of an arm punt. Fortunately, that interception I mentioned got negated by a roughing the passer play that was admittedly, I don't like how that call is administered. I thought Mac Brown had a pretty legitimate beef there, but that is how the rule is written. It was administered properly to the letter of the rule, and the interception came off the books in that case. And then on defense, yeah, I think it's fair to ask Barrett Carter, hey, what did you do differently this year to get into game shape better during the offseason? That was his line after the Duke game, that, yeah, he kind of didn't really have a good handle on just how game ready his conditioning was. He was expected to be in a leadership role last year, and that is something that, in my opinion, basically should not have happened for a guy who was looking to have his final year before he went off to the NFL. Like you said, we thought he'd be in camp by now. So in the pros, not getting ready for another year of Clemson camp. It is great to have him back. Don't get me wrong. That is
Absolutely.
probably the biggest return that we've seen in a while. And there have been a lot, as far as guys coming back who could have gone pro, came back for their senior year. Xavier Thomas and Justin Maskell were a couple more last season who were very critical at that position of need. It shows that Clemson can play the NIL game. Maybe that ties in a little bit to Bryce Davis, who we were just talking about. There were some rumors that Duke made some heavy NIL offers, but you see Clemson come through as guys' careers progress, and that may not be over 3 or 4 years of a balance sheet really that much of a deficit that needs to be closed. And Carter, you would think, would be another example of that. And then Mickens, like you said, he's one of several Clemson players whose fathers have played in the NFL. A couple of commits on that list I mentioned earlier also have fathers who played in the NFL. So they should have some kind of grip on how to handle an event like this, how to answer the questions in a way that won't kind of sell out your locker room. But when you've heard Coach Mike Reed talk about some excitement for this secondary, I'm glad to see RJ Mickens out there representing them. So what do you think will be some of the big questions? Like I mentioned, Cade Klubnik having to deal with probably turnover questions, maybe Carter dealing with conditioning. What do you think are some of the other big questions that these guys will face?
Well, I think a lot of them will be about getting back to the playoff. Why has Clemson slid? We can debate whether the slide is as big as some people say it is or want it to be. Clemson's still in the top 95 percentile in the country. Some people don't want to act like Clemson's just been terrible the last few years compared to its own play the years before that, maybe, but compared to everybody else, probably not. So I think it's going to be on that. I think it's going to be on the new ACC. What those teams bring. I think there'll be a lot of talk about Clemson and Florida State. So that'll be a big focus. Some talk about the lawsuit. I don't know that the players will get into that. Even Dabo Swinney was asked about it last week, and he's not, that's above my pay grade. If it's above Dabo's pay grade, it's definitely above the player's pay grade, right? So
NIL hasn't gotten that big yet.
yes. I think NIL will be a part of it. I think the portal people will be asked about the portal, that kind of stuff. But I do think the focal point will be about the quote slide of this Clemson football program. And look, Bill, if they had beaten South Carolina, and they didn't 2 years ago, they would have been in the playoff that year. So would we still be talking about this quote unquote slide as much as we are? Yes, they have slid. That cannot be argued. I'm not arguing against that. But the fact that that's all that people want to talk about with this program, it's exhausting. But we know how college football fans and quote unquote experts are, and same with across all sports. They get a narrative in their head and they don't want to let it go no matter what the facts say. Right. And Clemson has slid. Yes, there's no doubt about that. But what happens if Clemson gets back in the playoff this year? Is it still a slide? I don't know. We can't project. That's a hypothetical. We'll find out as the season goes along. But I'm sure that's what a lot of the questions will be about: turnovers, the slide, that kind of stuff.
Yep. And it'll be interesting to see that media poll that comes out every year, who's going to be favored to win the conference. That should be neck and neck between Clemson and Florida State. But you may see some, what is the others receiving votes? You may see a little broader selection there. I mean, goodness, if Vanderbilt can get not one but two votes for SEC potential,
right?
Then how many can you give to Virginia Tech? How many can you give to Miami? How many can you give to Louisville? I think all those teams are garnering some interest, and I think some of that is people just want to make the ACC race sound deeper than it is. I think they're all quality programs. I don't know that you would pick them as the favorite. I think you would pick them as a contender on some level, whether it's sort of contender number 3, whether it's a dark horse contender. I think they're quality teams who are on the rise, and we'll see if they're ready to take a first step toward getting in the ACC championship game sooner than I would expect, I'll admit. But we'll see who those teams bring and how those players manage to garner interest, how the coaches manage to drum up interest. Do they want to cast themselves as a favorite? That can sometimes pick up a little energy. So we'll just see how that all goes. Tell us what you think. I don't know if we will come back if there's no major breaking news and discuss what's said at ACC Media Days. There's a lot of that out there. If something does rise to that level, we will talk about it, but feel free to use the comments in this episode, both before, during, and after the ACC Media Days to tell us all how you feel about it. YouTube.com/Clemson Kickoff. And then we're on social media. If major news does break, at Clemson Kickoff, mainly on Twitter, but you'll see us elsewhere. We certainly did get a few tweets out about Davis's commitment, who we talked about, and we'll be keeping an eye on ACC Media Days coming up, as well as the All-In Cookout recruiting event. We'll see if they can turn any of those prospects into commits. And then our next episode, we will resume the 10 for 24 series, the kind of dual series by that name that we have going on, previewing all the opponents on the schedule, also taking a look at all the Clemson position rooms. And I believe next up will be one of those backfield groups on the defensive side. So we will start detailing some of that as well. And someone who, Mike Reed, by the way, talked about during the coaches previews that caught my eye, and in how excited he was about that player, because there hasn't been a lot of news about that. So we will there's a pretty good film at 11 tease for you, right? We will get into that in our next episode. Until then, keep your eye on us on social media. Go back and check out our old episodes, and until we come back at you again, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. If you voted for Vanderbilt to win the SEC, you should lose your vote. Go Tigers.
Commodores down.
Yeah, Commodores down. That's right.